Seahawks fans, wherever you may be, thanks for listening to the show. Join your hosts, Bill Alvstad and Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, hi, Seahawks fans. Welcome back to another episode of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with co-host Keith Myers, here to talk Seahawks football. Today, we're going to do a Senior Bowl preview on the offensive side of the ball. Believe it or not, Senior Bowl is just 1 week away, which gives us a chance to talk about players for the first time in the offseason here, which is our one of our favorite things to do. We're in the process, both of us, of really learning these players for the first time. Both of us focus on the NFL season throughout the year and then pivot in the offseason to then focus towards the NFL draft and the lead up to that. And so we're learning these players, I think, mostly for the first time. Obviously, we watched a little bit of college football. We kind of know who the big guys are. But to get into the weeds, get into the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th round of this draft, as far as player evaluations, that does take a little bit of time. And it does start right here with the Senior Bowl. Most of these guys, I think there's about 110 guys on the rosters that end up getting drafted. So there's a lot to talk about, a lot of players. Focus on the offensive side today. First, we're going to just chat briefly about the head coaching search for the Seahawks and kind of find out where that's at. Hey, Keith. Hi, man. How you doing? Welcome in.
Yeah, it's been a busy week. A lot going on. A lot of coaching stuff to follow, and then trying to get a handle on these Senior Bowl rosters and really make that transition into off-season mode and draft mode. Yeah. There's a lot of players. There's a lot of players to look at in 1 week. So been a very busy week. I hope everyone likes the show.
Yeah, no doubt. So coaching search-wise, the second round of interviews, it looks to me, are apparently over. Now, there could be some players, there's coaches that haven't been mentioned that are meeting in the background. Mike Vrabel comes to mind. Doesn't necessarily need to be declared that we're interviewing coaches. He's not under contract. He could pop in, pop out. We've seen Dan Quinn go through to Ejiro Evero, just went through his second interview today.
Graham and Kafka have both each had an interview this week as well.
Right. And then we've got a couple of coaches that are still in the playoffs that we really have limited access to. And in fact, they haven't interviewed Mike McDonald yet, just because of the timing of when the coaching search started and the playoffs. And, they're probably a little piece of them would like for the Ravens to lose this game this weekend so that they can begin that process, because it seems to me, maybe you as well, I believe, that John Schneider has his eyes, maybe first and foremost, first and second choice, are coaches that are still in the playoffs.
Yeah, you got Ben Johnson, who's with the Lions, and McDonald, who's with the Ravens. Both those guys are young, bright minds, and guys who are currently coordinating some of the best, units in their, on their side. And then you've also got, within both of them, the Ravens have one of the best, franchise and organization cultures in the league. And so McDonald's coming out of that. That's something that Schneider will covet. And I know the Lions aren't known for that, but under Dan Campbell, their culture has shifted and has become a really positive one, and that's what they're kind of being held up there as an example of, hey, you can turn things around with the right coach and that kind of stuff. So I think both of those guys offer Seattle a lot in theory, but we don't know, and we don't even know. But it does appear that everything's kind of on hold till Sunday. They're going to let these games be played, see what happens, see if either of them become available, and then go forward. Which does tell me if it was cut and dry already, if Dan Quinn had the job, they wouldn't be waiting. but Schneider is determined to wait and interview these guys if they become available.
Well, there's really only two coaching jobs now available in the NFL: Washington Commanders and the Seattle Seahawks. And there's a number of different candidates that have been parried around, and they're still all available currently to John Schneider. So he probably feels like he's going to get his first or second choice. I would imagine he's going to throw the bank. Jody Allen's told him that they've had this plan for a while. So I would imagine he'll do whatever it takes to get his first choice into this building. And I'm just very curious and interested about those two young coaches. I always thought it was a possibility that John Schneider would kind of go in that direction, but you had Dan Quinn there. Mike Vrabel became available, and a few other seasoned veteran coaches. And I thought that he would kind of go that way because it was the safe way to go. It was the way that the team could continue winning. His job would be safe. They would go down the path with Geno Smith and kind of run it back a little bit. He, in fact, said that the team was basically made ready to go. A few missing pieces that they could adjust in the offseason, and this team would be kind of ready to win. They've been in the playoffs year before last, just missed out this year. It's not inconceivable to think that they could put together another win or two to get into the playoffs this next season with some adjustments. He may just decide to reboot this thing and make it into his image, get a young guy up and coming, a tactician, a guy that's known for X's and O's and maybe not so much leadership at the top, and maybe he hits a home run and that leadership comes along as well. You just don't know. From our perspective now, those guys have been in coaching trees for a while in the NFL, both guys. And so they've been exposed to a lot of culture, a lot of other really successful programs and so forth. So if some of that comes, I think that's the bonus there. But I think really what they're doing with the young guys is trying to get a step ahead in this league, where if you relax too much or if you sit on your laurels too long, you'll fall behind. And I think that's what happened with Pete Carroll. Love Pete Carroll. I enjoyed him as a coach. He'll always be one of my favorite coaches of the Seattle Seahawks. Definitely the most successful first ballot Hall of Fame coach. But there were some, after sitting back for a month after all this happened, there's a sense there that things just got stale. And I think this completely wipes that out and really does start over. It's exciting, but scary for me. I've been around the franchise since the very beginning. You've been around for a very long time as well, nearly 40 years. And you know that success isn't guaranteed in the NFL, and you can make these changes and they look great on paper, and they've had wildly successful offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator campaigns in the most recently, but coaches fail in the NFL all the time, and teams really kind of go downhill after that for a while because you've completely disrupted your culture. Your different schemes require different types of players, and you're constantly resetting. And if you don't have that franchise quarterback, you kind of float in no man's land for a while, and that's one of my fears. But anyway, enough of that.
I mean, yeah. I mean,
so let's talk.
That to me is, I would say that to me is the big risk about going with one of the younger guys, is because their failure rate as head coaches is really, really high when teams do that, and much higher than even like quarterbacks. And we know the quarterback failure rate is really high. So you can hit a home run, you can get a Sean McVay, right? Or you could get a Cliff Kingsbury or Nathaniel Hackett.
And the list goes on and on.
Yeah.
Dable,
and I'm not saying any of these guys,
guys.
we just don't know. And that's why I've always leaned Dan Quinn, is just because I know he's a known quantity. I know he can win with him. I know you can get to a Super Bowl with him. I know, like, he's a guy that has innovated and continued to stay fresh and managed an organization. So that's why I lean that way. I get that maybe his ceiling isn't quite as high as maybe like a Mike McDonald or Ben Johnson, but his floor is much higher as well. So
Yes, that's true. That's very true. And we'll see what happens. I would imagine things will start to break this next week. You get some impatience. I think that I expect that maybe the Ravens to win, and uh, that would make that the testing the patience of John Schneider to wait for his preferred coach to get done with the Super Bowl is just crazy to me, because that would be an additional
2 weeks,
3 weeks from today.
Yeah.
3 weeks from Sunday.
So what you end up with in that situation is, if you just hang it out there and you're like, we're waiting, guys will start pulling their name.
Yes.
And guys will start being like, you know what, I'm just going to announce that I'm returning to my team.
And it makes it very difficult then to build a coaching staff.
Yeah.
After that.
One of the few times we've seen a team successfully do it, where they waited until after the Super Bowl, was Dan Quinn to Atlanta. But part of that was because he had lined up Kyle Shanahan as his offensive coordinator, and it had been decided. They just couldn't announce it. Like everything was decided. And so he was assembling a coaching staff and had, Kyle Shanahan lined up to be his offensive coordinator in Atlanta.
So remind me, Keith, what are the rules around the interview process after this weekend?
I believe you can do interviews during the bye week, between the championship games and the Super Bowl, but you cannot hire anyone until they're done. So if Mike McDonald wanted to come in and the Seahawks are like, okay, yeah, you're a guy, they can't announce that. They can't do anything. They can't actually sign him, but he can go back to work and be using back channels to put a coaching staff together. Okay. And at that point it will leak out, which is the same thing that happened with Quinn.
We've made it this far. We might as well be patient now. If coaches are willing to play along. If guys like Dan Quinn don't announce that they're going to go back to Dallas this week, and Vrabel decides he's going to go onto somebody's staff or back, into college or whatever. So
it sounds like Vrabel's going to go to the Patriots to be their defensive coordinator.
Interesting.
So
yeah, fun stuff.
I'm surprised that Atlanta passed on Bill Belichick. It seemed like that was going to be kind of a done deal after his second interview.
Yeah,
and then suddenly they hired Raheem Morris.
Yeah.
So
and left Belichick out in the cold. I mean, where's he going to go? He's probably going to go into TV, I would imagine.
Yep, he's got a contract with, I think, Fox to go be an announcer.
So let's talk Senior Bowl. All right.
Yeah.
So there's a few things at the top I want to talk about before we start talking about players. One is that this was a pretty challenging year. I watched a couple interviews with Jim Nagy to prepare for this show. And Jim's overarching idea was the last 2 years have been extremely challenging to put together rosters for the Senior Bowl. And this one in particular, they had juniors eligible this year for the first time. That didn't work out exactly the way that they'd planned because of certain factors that are keeping guys in college longer. That you have the COVID years, which extend eligibility to a certain number of players, the NIL money, which is real, players' brand and likeness for sale, allowing players to make money while they're in college, and then transfer portal, of course, injuries play a role as well. All those factors have really contributed to keeping players in college longer, and that was really evident this year, apparently, to the point where Jim talked about the weakness of this draft in rounds 5 through 7, that there will actually be teams changing strategy this year because of that. and either grouping picks to move out up and around, or having teams use those late round picks to push them into the future for 2025 and so forth. So that was interesting to hear about all of that, and just building rosters at the Senior Bowl and those challenges. But that's the fascinating part as well when you listen to a guy like Jim Nagy, because really the Senior Bowl is kind of a showcase for all things small school guys competing against big school guys, to kind of put them on a level playing field for the first time. So by the time they get to the combine, they're looked as being legit prospects, guys playing new positions or trying new techniques. The interview process of the Senior Bowl, this is the first time, the local area scouts for teams have been watching these players for 5, 6, 7 years, sometimes going back into high school. But they've never really had an opportunity to talk to anybody because of access and so forth. And a lot of these guys have agents, at this point, so you got to work through those channels. But they have the interview process for the first time at the Senior Bowl, which gives teams the first chance to sit down and meet. I think every player has 15 minutes with each team, times 32 teams, if schools request that. So this is kind of where it all starts for teams to really kind of lock in their boards and so forth. They've scouted these players. They know what they do on the field, but all the intangible stuff starts this week as well.
Yep, there'll be medical evaluations for some of them. And the other thing that's worth mentioning is that the game itself next weekend matters very little. A lot of the scouts have left before the game starts. They're there for practice. They're there to watch how these guys compete, what they do as they're being put through drills, how they do in one-on-ones, really get a gauge for those type of skills, rather than, who puts up stats on next weekend. So, yeah, this next week's always a fun one.
Yeah, for sure. I thought we'd start with the quarterbacks because I think that's one of the best groups here, along with the offensive line. I think offensive tackle is extremely strong in this draft. I mean, it's just crazy. If you need a tackle as an NFL team, you're going to get one out of this draft, I think.
Actually, if you need an interior one, there's a lot to like there too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll let you talk about the offensive lines in this show for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Let's start with like the two quarterbacks at the top in this showcase, because I'm a little surprised that they came, and because some years you don't get the high profile quarterbacks to come. But B, these guys are really good, and I'm really looking forward to what they do. And I'm talking about Bo Nix and Michael Penix.
Mm-hmm.
Bo Nix has had a storied career in college football. Went through the transfer option for him to get over to Oregon. Really changed as a prospect. Went from a guy who didn't have a really decent offensive line, kind of played off script a lot, really struggled with completion percentage and so forth. Always had the arm, but it wasn't seen as being kind of a NFL ready quarterback in a NFL ready offense. And he goes to Oregon and just a Heisman finalist, first team all Pac-12 offensive player of the year, good arm strength, athleticism. I think he's going to end up being a quality starter in the NFL. I think this type of game helps him kind of showcase himself against other prospects, and there's other good quarterbacks in this game as well. So I think he's playing because I think he wants to separate himself, A, and B, solidify himself as maybe a top 15 pick in the NFL draft.
Well, there's the other part of this is that he's an older guy. He's an older prospect, and older prospects, especially at quarterback, don't tend to make it in the NFL. That's just a historical trend that the guys that come in at 24 that aren't going to play their first game until 25 almost never make it in the NFL. And he's here to try and dissuade that. He's trying to look, I am a guy that can lead your team and get you wins. And I think he needs to be here, honestly, because of that. Otherwise, he has the potential to fall out of the first round because of that reason. And the same is true for Penix. Penix is an older guy. who's also had two ACL injuries.
And that's where the medical stuff comes into play this week for the first time for him.
And the thing with both of them is, like, Bo Nix didn't face a lot of pressure. That offensive line in front of him at Oregon was really good.
Yeah. Both these guys, actually.
And Penix also played behind a really good offensive line. And on the rare occasion when guys did get after him, they moved him off his spot, he didn't look as good as he did in the other games where he had time and could light people up. So I think there's some questions about both of them that they're hoping they can answer and answer positively by coming down here to Mobile and playing this week.
Yeah. Now, see, you had mentioned the idea of the game really doesn't matter. That is true, but I am looking forward to the game to watch these two guys throw the ball and a couple other guys as well. Just for that reason. Yeah, Penix, talk about an arm. He's got a real opportunity here. A little older as well, has the ACLs. The medicals are just going to be everything for him. If those are fully repaired and he has no degenerative issues, I think, he's going to end up being a first-round pick for sure. If he's got some sort of degenerative knee issues, and it's only a matter of time before he gets another ACL or something, he could drop in this draft. He could be one of those guys that ends up dropping, even though the talent is there, similar to a Hooker from last year.
Yeah. Look at the rest of these guys. I think there's those two, which are first round talents, and then they're fighting to stay there. Then there's a group that are middle round guys, second, third, fourth, in Michael Pratt out of Tulane, who I actually like in this draft. I think
I like a couple of these guys. He's one of them.
He's got a chance to make it in the NFL as more than just a backup. Spencer Rattler is an interesting name in that he's
going to be a riser.
He's a guy that failed out of a job and landed in another one, throws a lot of picks, but man, is that kid athletic, and he's got a freaking cannon. Some coach is going to fall in love with him and think they can fix him.
Yeah.
Joe Milton out of Tennessee is another guy with big guy with a big arm. So the guys and then there's, Carter Bradley and Sam Hartman, who out of South Alabama and Notre Dame. Those guys are late round. Those guys are trying to get into the draft and get, a fifth or sixth round pick and get themselves an opportunity. So they're going to be out there too. That's 7 quarterbacks if you can count. And since it's split over 2 teams, that means that one team has more quarterbacks than the other. The 8th spot is sitting there waiting for Heisman Trophy winner Jaden Daniels to either elect to accept his invitation or decline it. He has yet to do either. So they don't really know what's going on with him.
Interesting. I really like the kid from Tulane. I also like Joe Milton. Teams are going to like Joe Milton. Jim Nagy was really high on him, said that, there are NFL teams that surprisingly have Joe Milton as a fringy first round grade, second round, based on upside alone. His frame, 6'5", 235 pounds. He's a pocket kind of quarterback, obviously. He's got all the physical tools that you want, but he's inconsistent as far as his ability to deliver the ball on multiple levels, across the defense and so forth, the processing stuff. But he's got that elite arm strength, and the mechanics, though, the deep ball accuracy. He's a little older prospect, which seems to be a theme. I think you're going to see that for the next few years as quarterbacks get out of this COVID protocol and extending their time in the NFL with the NIL money and so forth. So, but I like Joe Milton. And then the other guy that you mentioned, Michael Pratt from Tulane, 2.5, 220 pounds, very experienced, has a lot of playing time in college. His ability to process and get the ball spread around is really good. He's a gamer. He's a guy that can come up and show up and win games for you, kind of elevate a program. Jim Nagy talked about that a little bit He
Yeah,
felt like
I think
Michael
that
Pratt
I
was a
think
guy that elevated Tulane.
yeah, he did, and I think Pratt is a better prospect than Milton. Milton
I
is
do too.
toolsy. He's got the huge arm and all of that, but if you go and watch him, he typically doesn't know what to do with the football. He doesn't know where to go with it. He's behind on learning how to read defenses and go through progressions and all of that. Where I don't think Michael Pratt has that problem. I mean, you don't think of Tulane
He's
as
a
being
mature player.
a football school, but they've been good while he's there, despite not having a lot of talent around him. Um, he's a guy that I think he's going to end up starting this process underrated and
I
will
agree.
rise.
I think that he's probably in that second tier. If you
Mm-hmm.
take a look at all the guys at the top, and then you add Bo Nix and Penix, and then after that, there's a drop off. There's the ledge there, and you get into about the second round, first 15 picks of the second round. By the time the combine's over, that's where this guy's going to end up being.
Yep, he's going to be that next quarterback and has a chance to actually be a good starter at the next level.
I agree.
Right now, teams are probably more on this than the draft media, but the draft media sees Tulane and they're going to start him off lower, and it'll take them time to catch up. But
And there's where the value of the Senior Bowl comes into play.
yeah,
Because the way that I should mention this too is this year the coaching, the way that the coaching is done at the Senior Bowl has changed. There's a head coach, but then the staff, the assistants and coordinators and so forth are from all over the place. So there's like 15 teams represented at the Senior Bowl this year with membership and coaching staffs that are going to have access to these players and be able to watch them and so forth. So that's going to be really important. The other thing is he's going to be going against really decent pass rushers and defenses that are going to force him to kind of step up his game. And, I would imagine if there's one player that's most nervous about the opportunity to improve his draft stock, quote unquote. I mean, teams have already got him kind of figured out, obviously, but as far as like the mock drafts and the amateur guys out there trying to predict the draft, this is a guy that could be definitely a riser, a guy that can go from middle third round grade, into the back end of the first round. If teams
and I think
really want to go
Spencer
and
Rattler's
get a
another
quarterback.
one. Spencer Rattler is another one that's going to do that because
Agreed.
I mean he's huge, huge arm, just all the tools possible. He was also one of the most highly pressured quarterbacks in college football the last 2 years, and so his stats may not be great, but he's used to dealing with pressure the way that Nix and Penix aren't. So his stats aren't going to drop considerably by moving to the next level the way other guys will. Let's move on to running backs.
Sure. I was going to ask you really quick, how do you feel about the quarterback class in this draft when you account for the three guys at the top as well?
Oh, this is one of the deepest quarterback classes we've ever seen. There's 6 guys with first round grades. There's 2 others, I think, that have second round grades. There's a lot to like here. There really is.
So when you look at Seattle's strategy, knowing that they do not currently have a second round pick, but they've got 2/3, they potentially need a franchise quarterback out of this draft. If they wanted one, if they really wanted one, they could get it done. What do you think that the strategy is going to be for Seattle? They've got a pick at 116 overall.
Honestly, because of the depth of it, I mean, you gotta kind of look at the teams above them and how many of them have drafted quarterbacks recently. There's a bunch of teams that need them. But then there's teams above them that don't. I think you need to move up. You maybe package one of those thirds and move up, 2 spots or 3 spots to make sure you get a guy that you want. But you're not going to get up far enough to get Caleb Williams or Drake May.
Or even Jane Daniels, possibly.
Well, it depends on, I mean, we'll see how Jaden Daniels stacks up. Like my um, initial like look over the quarterbacks, which is very limited. So this is going to change drastically, but it has him lower. I would say that if you just look at him as a passer, I'd put Penix
True.
up there, Nix up there, before I put Daniels up there. And I still need to evaluate the Michigan quarterback. Although
Yeah.
he's a guy that, the draft media has said, okay, he's a first round pick. I haven't evaluated him because he was a junior and he's kind of a surprise that he came out. But you look at those 6 guys as first round quarterbacks, and then you have guys like Pratt and Radler that are going to be second round quarterbacks, I think. And that's 8 guys. That's a lot of quarterback talent. That's more quarterback talent in the first 2 rounds of this draft than you see in, the entire draft of most years.
Interesting. So you mentioned switching to running backs. Let's do that. Who stands out for you?
There's a lot of guys that kind of stand out. I like Lloyd, Marshawn, lovely name, Lloyd, out of Southern Cal.
Right.
I think he really stands out as a pro prospect there. Guys
Nagy called him the best running back in the draft. Just really explosive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. He's the guy that stood out. When I saw that name, I was kind of surprised. I'm like, as a running back, you don't necessarily want to go in there and get yourself hurt or anything like that. Especially when people think that, you're going to be a good one. Jalen Wright out of Tennessee, 5'11", 210, a lot of yards, including almost 600 yards after contact this last year.
Yeah.
So that's a guy that interests me a lot, because, I mean, after those yards after contact are really important. And Ray Davis out of Kentucky, 5'10", 216, I think, is another guy who makes guys miss, and it kind of has that bowling ball, bounces off guys and keeps his feet and keeps going. And both of those guys, I think, are going to be interesting guys to watch in this process for the Seahawks.
Yeah, guys like Jonathan Brooks and Trey Benson and Blake Corum, Bucky Irving, not going to be in this game. But one of the running backs I like is Isaiah Davis out of South Dakota State, one of the up-and-coming draft's most talked about guys. NFL frame, 6'1", 220 pounds, explosive. When you look at players from smaller schools, they, scouts want to see the production and all that kind of stuff. But, he's got 3,000 yards, 32 touchdowns in just the last couple seasons. But he's got to come prove it at the Senior Bowl, and that's kind of what this game's all about. A guy like Cody Schrader, a running back out of Missouri, is interesting, 5'9", 213. Dylan Lobb out of New Hampshire, another small school guy. You're going to see a lot of those guys at the Senior Bowl, and that's why they're here.
Who's probably my favorite person in this group coming in? A guy named Kamani Vidal out of Troy.
That's funny. Yeah.
This guy runs like
Troy's
a tank.
all-time leading rushing leader.
Yeah. Ran for 1,600 yards and 14 TDs this last year. But out of those 1,600 yards, over 1,000 of them were after contact.
Wow.
This guy just doesn't go down. But he doesn't have the speed. He's a between the tackles grinder. He's a Chris Carson.
He's a bowling
is a good comp for him.
He's 5'8", 215.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not a big guy, not a lot of speed, but good luck tackling him.
Interesting. Yeah, he bounces. He bounces, and he's got elite speed for sure.
And
Yeah.
he's got elite balance. And his ability to keep his feet and bounce off guys, but he doesn't have elite speed. That's the thing, is he's going to get chased. He's not a guy that's going to break away and run away from guys, but you need 6 yards on, 2nd and 10 to set up he's a guy that you can hand the ball to. So
Yeah.
I think he probably won't get taken until like the 4th or 5th round. He's not that great of a prospect, but he looks like he's going to be fun.
One of my favorite running backs is not going to be at the Senior Bowl, and Braylon Allen, the running back out of Wisconsin, 6'2", 245 pounds, runs purported 4.40. Jim Nagy said he's staying home, not participating in the Senior Bowl so he can work on his 40 for the combine. I think that's a mistake, considering that the running back class at the Senior Bowl. I thought that Braylon Allen could benefit from that. But he's so Seahawky to me. And we always wanted that guy that was like just a tank, that reminded you of Marshawn Lynch, and that's what that guy does. Okay, so how about wide receiver? It's a pretty decent
group
class.
Of wide receivers.
Yeah,
it really is an interesting group of wide receivers. Who's your favorite?
That's a good question. I have a favorite. I'll show you. Xavier Leggett.
Yep.
In this,
I knew who you were going to go with.
Yeah. I mean, what's not to like? 6'3", 227 pounds, runs a 4.29.
Yep.
40,
Guy's tall, big, fast, plays really strong. Not necessarily the greatest route runner in terms of like being shifty or anything like that. But he's a fun guy. He's a guy that is going to entice a lot of teams.
Yeah. One of the other guys is a guy that you probably never even heard of, is Jacob Cowing, the wide receiver out of Arizona. Jim Nagy called him the most explosive and faster than Tank Dell, comped him to Deshaun Jackson. And for a guy I've never heard of before this process started, Jacob Cowing out of Arizona is a name to watch. Nagy said that he would be lighting it up in practice and so forth. So just somebody fun to watch. I don't know that he's necessarily in play for the Seahawks, but I don't know what's necessarily in play for the Seahawks at this stage, because we don't know who the head coach is going to be and so forth. All I could tell you is John Schneider's been our GM and made the draft picks for 13 or 14 years, but it could all change this year as far as their methodology, who they really covet, what types of players that they're interested in, all that kind of stuff. So
got to keep an eye on would be Western Kentucky's Malachi Corley, 5'11", 210, is hard to tackle, yards after the catch guy. Like people have been, the stuff I've read about him, use Amon-Ra St. Brown out of Detroit as a comp. I saw a couple of people say Deebo Samuel, but I think that's a little setting the bar a little too high. But he's in that category of
the run
player.
after the catch kind of thing.
Yeah. So and not just like not a tiny Dwayne Eskridge guy, but an actual NFL body with that ability. And so he's a guy to keep an eye on. I love to see him in a Seahawk uniform. And then there's one guy which you and I haven't talked about yet, but I'm surprised because he's the guy who's going to get 100% of the press when it comes to wide receivers this year. And that would be Brendan Rice out of USC.
For obvious reasons.
That's Jerry Rice's son. You might have heard of Jerry. He's, only the greatest wide receiver of all time. But Brendan was the top target for USC this year. And he's not necessarily the fastest guy, which his dad wasn't either, but he's smart and runs good routes and does all those things. And I think he probably get overdrafted slightly because of his dad, but he's still going to be a day 2 pick and worthy of a day 2 pick.
Yeah. He's 6'3", 205, second team All Pac-12. Big body, pass catcher, excellent hands, really. Who would have thunk it? He's got the ball skills, all that kind of stuff, the change of direction, the, physicality and so forth. He's going to need to work on a little bit, the route tree and so forth. But yeah, I mean, currently his best attribute is he's the son of Jerry Rice. He's going to have to make a name for himself. I guess it starts here at the Senior Bowl, for sure. Yeah. Interesting class though. I do like the class overall. It'll be a fun class to watch at the Senior Bowl. Okay. Let's talk about tight ends and interior offensive line and the offensive tackles, Keith. The tight end class in this year's draft is going to be average. There's one big name at the top, but then there's everything else. What do you think about the tight ends at the Senior Bowl?
There's a couple guys that I'm going to look at. TCU's Jared Wiley, who's 6'7", 260, and Minnesota's Brevin Spanford, who's 6'7", 270.
He's a really good inline blocker.
He is, especially at 6'7". Yeah. So you can use him as a receiver and as a red zone threat and that kind of stuff. He doesn't have the downfield ability of a guy like Colby Parkinson, who's also that tall. But he's a better blocker. And both of those guys would be like pretty easy. Let Parkinson go get money and draft his replacement on day 3, fifth or sixth round
I
pick.
thought about the
exact
same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And not notice that other than they don't quite have his hair. But other than that, like, those are the guys that I'm going to be watching to see if either of those guys really step in and do what I think they're going to do based on they just profile as a Colby Parkinson replacement. And so both of those guys are interesting to me.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about offensive linemen. It's kind of a long list. I don't think we need to talk about everybody. There's some centers here that are going to be interesting for me. And then the tackle class, I thought was just outstanding this year in the draft overall. And there's quite a few guys at the Senior Bowl that are going to be drafted. And then you mentioned the interior offensive guys as really having a strength as well. So that kind of excites me. We're going to talk about the defensive side of the Senior Bowl in our next show. But on the offensive side, the trenches are going to be one of the probably key areas for the Seahawks to draft this year, I would think.
Oh, I would agree. They better. But there are some really interesting guys here, guys that I don't think Seattle will draft because I don't think they're looking at offensive tackle in that range. Oregon State's Talise Fuaga is a guy that is, that's a guy that's good. And he just
huge.
stands out. He just stands out when you watch him play.
And he's going to be a right tackle in the NFL, correct?
I believe so, because he's such he's not just a big, tall, fat, guy for a side. He's also such a mauler. And I think you can put him on the right side and he can do everything for you. A guy like, who's the guy out of Washington? Fautuanu. Did I say that reasonable?
That sounds good to me for right now. Troy Fautuanu.
He's 6'4", 217, which is not that big for a tackle, but he's got really good feet. And so he's going to be an interesting guy. I think he's going to be a guy that falls a little bit and be available slightly later than people think, because some teams are going to view him as a guard. But he's not a powerful inline blocker, like a road grader. But he's not really big enough to be that, left tackle. So he's kind of a tweener as far as being positioned, but his technique is good. His feet are good. His feet are really good. And that's just another player. A lot of these guys I just find really interesting. I find offensive linemen way too interesting according to everybody. But
well, I do like the guy from
set.
Oregon State. I mean, I think that, Seattle could be interested in a guy like that only because we just don't know what's going on with Abe Lucas. I think Abe's going to be fine, but we haven't heard any details yet on surgery and how it went and what it was and all that stuff. That'll be really interesting. But he's going to me, guys that show up and are just really physical animals at the Senior Bowl always get the press, always get the little short videos that come out on Twitter and everyone gets excited. And that's what's going to happen to the Fuaga. Is that how you pronounce that? That's what's going to happen to that guy. He's just a physical beast. He's going to punish defensive players. I like a guy that I like, and a guy that Jim Nagy mentioned is the highest ceiling tackle in the class, Tyler Gooten out of Oklahoma. It's a right tackle, one of the most gifted athletes in the class. I think that he's probably a top 20 pick. Currently, there's draft boards that have him kind of all over in between the first 15 picks in the second round, all the way up to, pick 20 in the first round. Nagy said he believed that he was going to come in and really solidify his spot there at right tackle as being one of the premier tackles in the draft.
Yeah.
So that's a guy I'd be interested in watching.
I look at this group and I think that, Fuaga, Futanu, and Tyler Guyton are probably first round picks, almost guaranteed. And then
Jim Nagy said he reminded Guyton reminded him of Tyron Smith with the elite athleticism, the way he floated around with his feet. He said Nagy said it was his favorite feat in this class.
And then you look at there's probably 5 more guys that, depending on how this process plays out over the next 3 months, are going to be in there in the second half of the first round. This is a deep tackle group.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
So,
and there's going to be probably 15 offensive tackles drafted in this draft, which is
Paul
usually you've got 10, 11.
Watch. Yeah.
Interesting.
It's
how about interior
group.
Guys and centers?
Okay. So, at center, there's a couple guys. Oregon's Jackson Powers Johnson is probably the best pure center in this class, but he's 6'3", 320. He's big for a center.
I like that, actually.
And he, not only that, but if you watch him, he plays with a mean streak. I think he's going to be real good in the next level. I think
he's at the Senior Bowl. Yeah. And Zach Frazier's at the Senior Bowl, which I'm really excited about. I mean, I thought those guys were probably 1-2.
Cedric Von Prawn.
Yeah. I'm excited about that.
Who's a 3-year starter at Georgia? A 3-year starter at Georgia. He's lost 1 game as a college starter.
Yeah. He's going to cry a lot in the NFL.
Yeah, probably. He's not used to losing, but he's a guy that he's a really nice pass blocker and just a road grader.
For Seahawk fans, what do you do at center this year? If anything, like they drafted the kid from Michigan last year, Olotimi. He's kind of the guy in waiting, but didn't really. I thought he would end up getting more snaps than he did this year, and he never really completely beat out Brown. We saw what Brown did on the field; it wasn't anything special. So now I'm a little bit concerned about Olotimi and his development. Maybe he just needed a year in the weight room and around the organization and learning the scheme and so forth. But does Seattle have to go out and address that in the draft or free agency this year?
I don't know. I think bringing in someone to compete with him is probably not a bad thing. if you get a chance to draft one of these elite guys because they fall a little bit, it matches need, you can go ahead and do it. And then Oluwatimi becomes, backup or guard, swing interior guy, whatever works for you. I think part of Oluwatimi not getting on the field more had to do with Bradford being on the field all the time. And just the coaches not wanting to put the two rookies next to each other. And the guards were so bad / injured that Bradford was always in there. And I think that is part of what plays into this. But I mean, you need more than one center. If you draft a guy, like Powers Johnson out of Oregon, he can play guard for you, as well as center. So and he can be your starting left guard and then be your backup center at the same time. Or he could be your starting center, and then if one of the guards get hurt, he slides out and you bring in Oluwatimi at the center. You know what I mean? Like, you can do stuff with guys like that can play both.
All right. So how about Cedric Van Pran? I really liked him as a prospect last year. There was a chance that he might have come out last year in last year's draft and been an option for Seattle in the middle rounds. And he stayed in school, probably improved his draft stock this year. He looks like he's going to be coming off the board in the second or third round. And he's in this game. So I'm curious just to see how he matches up physicality wise. He's undersized slightly at 310 pounds, 6'4", but for teams that need a guy that can move around a little bit and get into space, he'd be a good option.
If Pete Carroll was still the coach, I would look at Texas A&M guard Layden Robinson a lot closer, because this guy is one of those. He's 6'4" to 315, but he's a mauler. He'll take guys and drive them 15 yards downfield in their on running plays, but he doesn't move necessarily as well as teams would like, so he's not going to be much of a pass blocker. But Pete Carroll would have loved him. So
I agree.
We'll see.
Heavy hands kind of guy.
Oh yeah, he'll knock people back, drive people off, like solid run blocker.
I like Ladarius Henderson as the guy that can play both guard and tackle, and I want to talk to you about that just schematically for a second. It seems like in the Senior Bowl, coaches there have players play out of position a little bit more on purpose. They are asked to either slide inside from their normal tackle position in college, where they might translate better in the NFL, and guards sometimes slide over and take snaps at center, just to show their diversity. What's up with that at the Senior Bowl?
Well, I mean, part of it is to show their diversity. Remember, this is a draft showcase, and you've got guys that they were a tackle at, in college, but maybe don't have the length to play tackle at the next level. So coaches want to see them at guard, and so they slide them in and said, "Here, you might be asked to do this at the next level. How do you respond to it? How do you take instruction there?" And that kind of stuff. And that's the kind of thing that guys got to do. I mean, they're there to improve their draft stock. And if you go, "No, I'm not going to do that," why would a team want to draft you? Right? And so some of it, a lot of it is on purpose, because you have these guys that have skill sets that maybe line up slightly differently than what you see, and go ahead and move them and see how they do. I mean, Ladarius Henderson's a good example of that. A guy who's 6'4", 310 could probably play either, and would be one of those swing linemen that you could bring in and literally put anywhere on the field except for center, and know that he'd be all right. That's kind of value. But he only played tackle in college. And so does he really fit at guard as well as we think he does? And that's what this is about. It's giving the coaches an opportunity to have that question answered.
So one of the other guys that kind of fits in the same mold to me is Cooper Beebe, out of Kansas State, 6'4", 330 pounds, played both left tackle and left guard in college, being looked at more as a guard prospect in the NFL, but I would imagine he's going to take snaps at both spots in this game, and probably one of the guys one of the stronger guys in this draft class.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he's a guy that's thought of as like a round 2 pick, a top of round 2 pick, which might be a little high because I think that it's one of those you overvalue for tackle when he's going to end up inside, I believe. But if you got a guy you bring in as a guard and he can play that great, and then if you need him, he can slide outside and you can get by with him at tackle, because of an injury or whatever. God, there's just so much value to that. And very, very few guys can manage.
One guy I wanted to talk to you about seems like the top guard in this game, and maybe even in the class, is Christian Haynes, the offensive lineman from Connecticut. He's played right guard exclusively. And Seattle seems to have a need here. Now, we drafted Bradford. He played extensively. You could probably pencil him in as the starter at right guard potentially. But we've got Damian Lewis, who's unrestricted free agent now. And we may be down a starter at that position. But the way our draft board is set up, with the pick at 16 overall and then not picking until the mid 70s with back-to-back picks in the third round, how does Seattle position itself to kind of take care of that spot this year?
Well, I don't think that you worry about it at that stage. You look at, Bradford was a 4th round pick. Damian Lewis was a 4th round pick. Like, that's kind of the range where this team has found its guards. And so
but we've seen our offensive lines be middling for a long time. Does that change at all?
Yeah, but new coaching staff, and we'll see. There was this tendency to hold on to inside zone as the running scheme and trying to match talent to that. And I think we're going to see a more diverse running game now, and that will lead to a more diverse player pool available. And I think you can get more out of guys when you're not trying to shoehorn in exact needs. And so, you could. If the Seahawks wanted to use one of those 2 third-round picks on a guard, I'm okay with that. That's not a bad spot to be in. You're using. That's value, especially if you get a starter, someone that can come in and start day one.
It really does depend on if we can sign Damian Lewis again, I think.
Yeah, and we'll know that well before the draft.
Absolutely. Is there any other players you wanted to highlight?
I don't think so. We went through kind of all of the ones that I was interested in. There's a lot of guys here.
There's a lot of players we didn't even mention. But, that's what the practices are for and the game. We're going to have a report about that, what we see and so forth, post-game kind of report as well. And then we're going to do the defensive side in our next show. So still got a lot to talk about. It's crazy. There's a lot of players. There's a lot of players to talk about.
It's two entire rosters full of guys. So you're talking about 120 players that are 95% of them are going to get drafted. A couple of other guys, maybe it's more than that, maybe 98. There'll be a couple of guys that are here that end up as priority free agents afterward the draft. But most of these guys will get drafted. That's one of the things that I've really liked about what the Senior Bowl has done since Nagy took over. It used to kind of be, it was just whoever showed up is what it felt like. And
there wasn't this much openness about the process and about the practices, and the whole process was kind of closed off a little bit. And now it's completely wide open.
Yeah.
which is just fantastic.
Nagy's done a great job with that, and he's kind of put in a tough spot in terms of they've moved its location at times. Like, I guess they're back in mobile, which he likes, but they've taken away his ability to bring in a coaching staff. Like, hey, the Jets are going to run,
Right.
the national team, and the Falcons.
And they bring in all their
run.
assistants. They bring in their film guys. They bring in all of the infrastructure around that.
And so and that always worked well, but they basically were like, no, we don't want that anymore, because it was allowing the players that fit their scheme to look really good, and the players that don't fit their scheme to not be showcased. And it's supposed to be a showcase for everybody. So now they've got this like coaching staff, which is so fragmented and teaching different things. And, you have an offensive line coach that runs a power running scheme, and an offensive coordinator that's trying to install outside zone running play. You know what I mean? So it's weird. But it does lead to a more diverse showcase, which I think is what the NFL wanted.
Yes. And really, that's what this is all about. I mean, the NFL might as well just have its name on this game, because Jim Nagy and those folks are in direct contact with upper end executives and personnel guys at almost every club in the league. And they tell you like who they want in this game. They build these lists starting in the summer, and it continues. And then, as the list gets closer to being complete, Jim Nagy could go out to like all the guys he knows and say, listen, I've got this list of players. We've got 4 spots. Who do you want to see? And all the teams will get back to him on who they want to see, what they want to see, how they want to see it.
Plus, he's a good evaluator. When he comes in, he said, when he says this guy is going to surprise you and he's going to move up draft boards and he's going to be a late round pick, listen to him. He does tend to overhype guys a little bit, but that's his job.
Yeah. But he's very good at that. You're right.
But he does evaluate so they are going to come in, they are going to look good, they are going to move up draft boards, but instead of ending up in late round 1, they end up in like mid round 2, but they did the rest of it. He still identified a guy that was going to surprise everyone. He's good at that. And it's made for good groups to show up at the Senior Bowl and watch. There's not a lot of undrafted guys and guys that you'll never hear from again, and stuff like that here.
Yeah, so. No, absolutely. All right, let's get out of here. Good long show. Find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. You can find me at NW Seahawk. The show is Seahawks Playbook Podcast. Find it on your favorite podcast app and our YouTube channel. Hit the subscribe button if you will. We'll be back next show with the defensive side of the ball at the Senior Bowl, and hope you enjoy that as well, and join us for the show. So until next time, go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.